Trade Promotion Authority and get back in the game leading the rest of the world. I urge my colleagues then to help U.S. businesses, farmers, and our workers, and most importantly, our unemployed workers, by voting in support of Panama, Colombia, and South Korea trade agreements. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Utah.
Madam President, I compliment my colleague for his kind words and good words on the floor. He's a great leader in this Senate, and the senator from Iowa is one of the truly great people I've ever met. And Madam President, today we're finally considering our free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. It's been 9 long years since the authority to negotiate these trade agreements was passed by Congress. And it has been over 4 years, as the distinguished senator from Iowa said, since each of these agreements was signed. After a burst of international economic engagement under President Bush, we have witnessed nothing but passive indifference by the 111th Democrat-led Congress, and then in more recent years by the Obama administration. While purporting to support trade and seemingly acknowledging its benefits, the current administration took little concrete action to advance these or any trade agreements for years. In fact, the opposite was true. Instead of devising ways to gain their approval, President Obama used his time to create excuses for not supporting any of the 3 agreements. Finally, early this year, under relentless political pressure from Congress and from the American businesses and farmers who will benefit from these agreements, the administration's excuses slowly melted away. Then, with every reasonable excuse gone, and with bipartisan support for passing the agreements building and the end in sight, President Obama threw another obstacle in the path of their consideration. This time he made new demands for more spending on domestic worker retraining programs. Now let's consider that at a time when virtually every government spending program faces intense scrutiny and many programs are being cut, this administration demanded more spending for a program of dubious value and with an unproven track record. In doing so, the President put his thirst for more spending ahead of the interests of the broader American economy that would benefit from these agreements entering into force. And he risked the tens of thousands of jobs of his own administration that his own administration insists these agreements will create. His reckless demands ground any progress he had achieved to pass and ground those achievements to a halt. Those agreements to a halt. Accordingly, it took months for Congress to unravel the substantive and procedural Gordian knot of the President's making. Meanwhile, U.S. workers continue to lose ground as our foreign competitors completed agreements to benefit their workers at our expense. With today's vote, our nation can hopefully begin to awake from its trade stupor and confront the opportunities and challenges the world economy offers once again. Frankly, I am baffled by this administration's disregard for trade. They should know better. Our country benefits from free trade agreements, and the reason is simple. The tariffs of our trading partners are generally significantly higher than those of the United States. Free trade agreements even the playing field for U.S. exporters by lowering the tariffs of the United States and our trading partners to the same level of zero. Really have to be enacted. For those who say they demand fair trade, it is hard for me to conceive of fairer trade than that. On a level playing field where our products and services enjoy the same access and protections that foreign goods and services enjoy here in the United States. By leveling the playing field, free trade agreements promote U.S. exports. Indeed, U.S. exports to our free trade agreement countries increased at a faster rate than U.S. exports to the rest of the world from 2009 to 2010. Moreover, in 2010, U.S. exports to our free trade partner countries constituted 41% of all U.S. exports. Yet the United States has free trade agreements with only 17 countries, and that's out of the 234 countries on which the United States Department of Commerce collects trade data. So our exports to our free trade agreement partners, just 17 countries, come close to dominating U.S. exports. I ask unanimous consent that the balance of my remarks be placed in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that my next 2 remarks, sets of remarks, that they be placed in appropriate places in the record. Madam President, today I rise to pay tribute to Sergeant Daniel David Gurr of the United States Marine Corps. Sergeant Gurr was assigned to the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, 3rd Marine Division, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. He was killed by small arms fire while on patrol in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Sergeant Gurr was only 21 years of age, but as a testament to his character and reputation, hundreds attended his memorial service and hundreds more lined the procession route to where he was laid to rest. Sergeant Gurr always wanted to be a Marine. In fact, his friends and family from Vernal, Utah remember a young man who could hardly wait until his senior year at Uintah High School before enlisting in the Marine Corps. But even during his school years, his personality and character exemplified what it means to be a Marine. Sergeant Gurr was the captain of his high school soccer team and was always there for his teammates. By all accounts, whether in high school or as a non-commissioned officer, he was a leader and loved by many. Sergeant Gurr had a profound sense of duty and deep commitment of freedom and liberty. All he asked for was the opportunity to dedicate his life to the service and safety of others. His dedication and leadership was clearly apparent to the Marines who advanced him to the rank of sergeant, a truly impressive accomplishment for a 21-year-old. As we grieve the loss of one of this country's finest, let us celebrate Sergeant Gurr's life. His selfless and noble actions will never be forgotten. Madam President, I know I am joined by the entire Senate in extending heartfelt condolences to Sergeant Gurr's family. Elaine and I will certainly keep them in our prayers. Now, Madam President, today I rise also to honor Corporal Raphael R. Arruda of Ogden, Utah. Corporal Arruda was an Army reservist assigned to the 744th Engineer Company, 416th Theater Engineer Command. As a combat engineer tasked with finding improvised explosive devices, Corporal Arruda never shied away from driving the lead vehicle on operations. Out in front, protecting his fellow soldiers was where he was when an explosion took his life. Adding to this tragedy, Corporal Arruda's mother had died 10 days before, and the corporal was but days away from his 22nd birthday. Corporal Arruda was raised in Brazil until the age of 12. His family immigrated to the United States and settled in South Ogden, Utah, where Corporal Arruda graduated from Bonneville High School in 2008. While in high school, he joined the Army Reserves and left for basic training only days after graduating from high school. After basic training, he attended Weber State University for a semester and planned to continue his education upon his return. Upon learning about Corporal Arruda's life, I was struck by what his family and friends had to say about him. Andre, his brother, and also Army reservist, said Corporal Arruda was the, quote, life of the party, unquote. His fellow soldiers said that the corporal was, quote, the guy who pushed everyone and made everyone laugh, unquote. It is a special leader who has the unique ability to motivate others while simultaneously making them feel at ease. Madam President, Corporal Arruda was a brave and selfless soldier. His family now bears a heavy burden. However, I hope that they will take comfort in knowing I am joined by the entire Senate in extending our condolences over the loss of Corporal Arruda and his mother. My wife, Elaine, and I will have them in our prayers. Madam President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Florida.
Madam President, I want to speak on the trade bills, but I just first want to comment on the fact, as the senator from Utah has reminded us of the sacrifice that a lot of young Americans are enduring. It is one of the more difficult tasks that I have to sign the letters to the families of condolence on the loss of one of the members of their family anywhere in the world having to do with the armed services. I might say that another major part of our protection of our national security is the young men and women that we do not hear about the men and women of the intelligence community all across the globe that likewise are protecting our national security interests, many times in direct coordination with the U.S. military. And from time to time, we have the casualties in the intelligence community as well. And I just want to express again my profound thanks and gratitude to those across the globe who are protecting the national security interest of our blessed country. Now, it's interesting because we just learned of a plot that was a threat to our security interest. Can you believe a plot to assassinate a diplomat here in our capital city of Washington? A plot that has intrigue like a B novel that brings in the Mexican drug cartels, a plot that, according to the Attorney General, has been hatched by high levels of the Iranian government. Now, the question is, who's in control in the Iranian government? Is it the supreme leader? Is it the President Ahmadinejad? Or is it what this plot was traced to, which is one arm of their governmental apparatus, the Revolutionary Guard, the Quds Force? It doesn't seem that Iran has its act together. And even though we hear the protestations by the Iranian ambassador at the United Nations that this is all a fabricated lie, this perpetrator has already confessed. According to the news reports, they are saying that this plot included bomb attacks, plotting on the Saudi and Israeli embassies here in Washington. And that's all here in our national capital. It was, according to the Attorney General, conceived, sponsored, and directed from Iran. And this is obviously a flagrant violation of international law. An FBI informant, in the transcript the Justice Department released yesterday, asked the alleged plotter whether he was worried about innocent people being killed by bombing in a restaurant where the supposed plot was to have taken place, where the Saudi ambassador was going to be dining. And in a reference to his Iranian superiors, this bomber said they want that guy done, even if 100 go with him. Well, these are the words of bloodthirsty people. And the people of the United States have every reason to be outraged, to view this plot as an outright attempt to assault our nation and our allies. I appreciate the Secretary of State calling for tougher sanctions. I want to hear what the administration is going to do to make it very clear that these kind of actions are not going to be tolerated. And, Madam President, I want to thank again the intelligence community, which is how I started my comments. I want to thank the intelligence community for what they are doing around planet Earth, day in and day in out, gathering the information that protects us. Madam Chairman, I want to comment on the matter at hand, the trade bills. I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for their hard work in bringing to the table and shepherding these trade agreements through the Finance Committee and now here to the Senate. Madam Chairman, I came here to talk about what's good with these things. And other people are coming here to talk about what's good, and all you hear is people want to blame the administration for something. Well, why don't we say something good? Not only are these agreements with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama critical to the U.S. economy, they are certainly critical to my state of Florida's economy. And they send an important signal that the United States is not going to turn its back on economic engagement. These trade agreements are creating a level playing field for American companies by removing foreign barriers to U.S. exports and U.S. investment. And, oh, by the way, some of us would have not let these trade agreements go forward unless there had been also the passage of the Trade Adjustment Assistance, which is assistance for workers that might be displaced as a result of the trade bills, especially with regard to retraining. And the bottom line of these trade bills then means real jobs for struggling American workers. Now, if there's any doubt with regard to an economy like Florida's, trade with Colombia, trade with Panama, trade in our agriculture sector with South Korea, there is no question what's in the interest of my state. But this is also in the interest of the United States economy. The U.S. International Trade Commission estimates American economic output will grow more from the U.S.-Korea agreement than from the United States' last 9 trade agreements combined. That just from this one agreement, Korea, more economic output than the last 9 agreements combined. And the administration has taken extra steps to obtain these labor protections that I talked about, and further labor protections in the agreement with Colombia and the necessary tax transparency in the agreement with Panama. There's no question that free trade, if it's done right, creates jobs and opportunities. In my state, Florida is the launching point, the gateways to Latin America. And thousands of jobs in Florida depend on maintaining a vibrant commerce and the economic relations with our trading partners to the south. And if we fail to move these trade agreements with Colombia and Panama, we're going to run the risk of losing these jobs. Madam President, I often say, why does Florida reflect the nation in a lot of our political mood? It's because the country has moved to Florida. But what is also reflective of Florida, Florida is increasingly a reflection of the Western Hemisphere because of all of our ties into Central and South America and the Caribbean. And so under these agreements that we're going to pass, emerging industries in Florida, such as aerospace, it's going to be able to increase its sales abroad while we're going to be able to hire more people here at home. And in the agricultural sector, our ranchers and our farmers, our growers, are going to significantly benefit from these agreements. Korea's 54% tariff on certain citrus products is going to be eliminated immediately or reduced to 0 over 5 years. You know who that helps? It helps a specialty section of citrus called the Indian River region, the region that this senator grew up in. on the banks of the Indian River, the delicacy fruit of the world, the Indian River region. They are a huge exporter of fresh grapefruit, and especially that grapefruit going into Korea as a result of this agreement is going to be helped. The changes will create new export opportunities for the entire citrus industry. And the tariffs on Florida beef exports to Korea will also come down. Madam President, you know, a lot of people don't know, the presiding officer being from New York, they don't know that New York is really a great agriculture state. Well, a lot of folks don't know that Florida is not only how they would identify citrus, but is a huge agriculture state, and a lot of people don't realize how much the beef industry, the ranches that this senator grew up on, are so much a part of our economy, and among the 50 states, Florida being a leader among beef ranches. This is all going to benefit as a result of this trade agreement with Korea. And the Colombia and Panama agreements include the important protections to prevent Brazil, a major grower of orange juice, from shipping orange juice through these other countries to the United States. And these trading agreements are important for strategic reasons as well. Obviously, Colombia is a key ally in the region, and you got to give credit where credit is due to the Colombian government. The previous government of President Uribe, the present government, for the close working relationship with the United States military as well as our intelligence community. And give credit where credit is due that the government of Colombia pulled off that ruse that helped us bring our 3 American hostages that were held by the FARC for years out of the jungles. South Korea and Panama are strategic partners and share mutual interest in regional security and economic stability. And so, all of these trading partners, we are bound by our commitment to freedom and the rule of law. And these trade agreements are certainly going to help us to solidify our converging aspirations. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Kansas.
Madam President, it's my understanding that we are in morning business and I'm allotted 10 minutes. Is that correct?
There's no restriction on floor time.
Marvelous. I thank you, Madam President. Before the senator from Florida leaves, let me just say from the banks of the Indian River to the prairies of Kansas and Dodge City, I know that many people don't quite grasp the fact that there are a lot of cowboys in Florida, and obviously we have a lot of cowboys in Dodge City, but it just shows you from the wheat that we want to export to Colombia, despite their trade agreements with other countries, you want to export citrus, beef, the same kind of thing. Just shows you from Kansas to Florida, we have similar interests. I thank the senator for his comments and for his comments yesterday on the markup in the Finance Committee and for his support. A lot of my remarks will be very duplicative of his. That just shows you that in regards from Florida and Kansas, we have a very strong mutual interest.
Would the senator yield for a comment?
I'd be happy to.
And also in a bipartisan way that we are supporting this. Isn't that a wonderful term to suddenly throw around, bipartisanship, where we can come together not as partisans, not as ideologues, but in the best interest of the country?
I share the senator's views and very hopeful that this will not be the last trade agreements that we see. And again, thank him for his comments and his work. Madam President, some of my remarks will be duplicative of Senator Hatch and the senator from Florida. As I've indicated, But I want to really stress in behalf of our nation's farmers, ranchers, and manufacturers, service providers, I rise today to add my voice to the chorus of strong support for passing the pending trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and Korea. Now, to be candid with you, and I'm not trying to be a bad news bearer here, but I wasn't at all convinced this day would ever come. But after learning that the President was sending up the trade agreements to Congress, I think the word I thought of in my head was finally. Maybe 5 finallys. Finally, because it's been 5 years that the U.S. trade agenda has been put on hold. And quite frankly, I think hostage to demands by certain environmental groups, labor, a rewrite of the trade assistance. But yesterday, under the perseverance of the chairman, Senator Baucus, and others on the committee, finally the Senate Finance Committee did pass the trade agreements. We had a markup. It was amidst protesters. It was quite a not a unique situation, but one that the chairman handled very deftly. I would call to the attention of members in regards to their interest in the trade agreements, that they have any possible concerns. Read the remarks by Senator Hatch and by the chairman, by Senator Crapo, Senator Wyden, and Senator Kerry, more especially Senator Wyden, who got a little static from the audience, undeservedly. The good news, the pending trade agreements add up to $13 billion in additional exports, an estimated 250,000 jobs. That's estimated by the American Chamber of Commerce. Just a few big picture highlights. Right now, Korea imposes an average a 54% tariff for agriculture products. Within 3 years after implementation, 95% of these tariffs drop off, with the most zeroing out after a decade. For beef producers, and that's a big thing for Kansas, that means the 40% tariff on beef products will be phased out over 15 years. Around 75% of the ag and non-ag exports entering Colombia will be duty-free upon the implementation of the agreement. Duties on many other tariff lines will be phased out over a 5 to 10-year period. Panama, while reducing import duties is important, the expansion of the Panama Canal is not only an important project for U.S. bidders, it is a geographical key for international commerce, transportation, and security for the region. But just from the agriculture perspective, just for the Aggies, the 3 pending trade agreements represent a $2.5 billion upon full implementation. In regards to exports, more than 22,000 jobs. The Kansas Farm Bureau estimates that the 3 agreements in total are expected to increase direct exports by $130 million for Kansas ag producers and an additional 1,150 jobs. Finally, these trade agreements will help put American workers and exporters on a level playing field with our competitors and hopefully, tough job, regain lost market share. Now, let me emphasize, really emphasize, in the case of 2 of these agreements, Panama and Colombia, under normal condition, their exports already have duty-free access to the U.S. market. The pending agreements merely create a two-way trade and allow U.S. exporters the same treatment which we already grant their countries. It makes one wonder what all the fuss was about. And the fuss, the 5-year fuss and delay, hurt us, not them. And that's the point that I think everybody should finally discern. But 5 years, 3 years under this administration, the goalposts continued to shift and action was delayed indefinitely. 2 years under the previous administration, basically with objections by the House of Representatives. As a consequence, U.S. producers and exporters lost market share to our competitors. Let me give you an example. Over the past 2 years, U.S. wheat producers have already lost market share to Argentina, which receives preferential trade treatment based on a regional trade agreement. Just 2 years, the U.S. share of the Colombian wheat market dropped by 30%, including corn and soybeans. The lost market share jumps to 57%. In addition, the largest food processor in Colombia, Nutresa, announced shortly after the Canada-Colombia trade agreement went into effect that they were sourcing all of their wheat purchases from Canada, accounting for half of all of the wheat imports. Previously, U.S. wheat growers were the largest suppliers of wheat in Colombia. In July, the Korea-European Union trade agreement, not U.S. agreement, European Union agreement went into effect. And within the first month, according to the Korean customs, the European Union exports are up 34%. That's lost market share going to the European Union, not the United States. Notably, aerospace equipment increased a whopping 1,693%. You can see where that is going. Kansas is a major player in the aviation sector. We export $2.7 billion in transportation equipment last year. But with the European Union agreement, why, you can see what happens with lost market share. Finally, with regard the United States to future trade and in trade in general, the United States must be trusted to stand by its word. Trust in your word in trade means everything. The dithering on these trade agreements has not been lost on our trade partners or the world at large. It's just not economic growth and job creation we've gambled with here. All the back and forth and increased demands on our part calls into question our integrity. Is the United States a dependable partner and ally? Now, as the former chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I'm quite familiar with who is a friend to the United States and who is not. In the 31 countries and 10 territories that make up the Southern Command, there is a growing sense of anti-Americanism. Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez is a perfect example. A decade ago, while Colombia was essentially a failed state, suffering from a war waged between the guerrilla groups and the paramilitary groups, the FARC and the ELN, much has changed. Much has changed over 10 years under the leadership of then-President Uribe and continued by President Santos. An amazing job. U.S. support during this time has helped to establish a strong relationship and form a key ally in an increasingly hostile area. So strengthening our economic relationship just makes sense. The unjustified delay on our part is not only embarrassing, it has potentially damaged our credibility, in my view. As Kansans and the rest of our nation continue the slow and bumpy climb out of these tough economic times, we must do all that we can to foster economic growth. Opening foreign markets to U.S. goods, services, and agriculture is an obvious and long overdue part of the solution. But we can't stop with passing these 3 trade agreements, pat ourselves on the back, and call it a day. I assure you that our foreign competitors are not stopping. In fact, Madam Chairman, it's been reported that there are approximately 100 trade agreements being negotiated right now, give or take, that do not include the United States. 100. We, the United States, we're negotiating one. Initiated in the waning days of the Bush administration, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The TPP provides critical access to the ever-growing Asia-Pacific region and has the potential to include other countries later in the future. While negotiations continue, there will soon come to a point when talks will stall because the U.S. negotiators' hands are tied without the protection of Trade Promotion Authority, or fast track as some refer to it. Without TPA, why negotiating countries will have little reason to negotiate, much less make any difficult concessions, until they know that the U.S. is serious. Fast track provides the substance to these talks. So why is TPA not a priority? I am concerned that as the administration quietly defers on seeking Trade Promotion Authority, why negotiators will be unable to negotiate and trade will take a back seat once again. The signal may well be, and I hope this is not true, that these trade agreements will be the last under the current administration. Now, let me get off the bad news bear stuff and the stubborn facts, and facts are stubborn things, and the 5-year delay. Let me give credit to the President for finally, yes, finally, sending these trade agreements to Congress, but let's not become pacified and the long overdue action. In order to stay competitive with our foreign partners, we need to stay in the game. Madam President, I yield back.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Madam President, I'm going to speak for up to 10 minutes, but I would first defer to the gentleman from Michigan for a unanimous consent agreement.
And I thank the senator from Louisiana. Madam President, I would ask after Senator Vitters completed his statement that I be recognized for up to 30 minutes and that senators, and that I yield time during that 30-minute period to senators on this side. We control the 30 minutes, though, immediately after Senator Vitters completed.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, today is the one-year anniversary of President Obama and Secretary of Interior Salazar finally lifting a year ago the formal moratorium on drilling in the Gulf of Mexico following the BP disaster. But, Madam President, that did not solve the problem then, simply lifting the formal moratorium. And I return to the Senate floor today to again say, still a year later, that problem is not solved. Because, Madam President, there is a continuing permit logjam. It started with a de facto moratorium. Now there's just been a trickle of permits, and there's a continuing permit logjam that has dramatically shut down and slowed energy activity in the Gulf of Mexico. And, Madam President, that must change. Of course, this is vitally important for my state, Louisiana, and the livelihoods of tens of thousands of my citizens. But, Madam President, that must change for the good of the country, too, for our economic well-being and to increase our revenues to address deficit and debt. And as we talk about jobs and various jobs bills and jobs proposals, we must focus on the domestic energy sector, and we must change the situation, reverse this slow-down, virtual shutdown of the Gulf for the good of the country. And I hope we do that. Madam President, to that end, I joined Congressman Jeff Landry yesterday in a meeting with Bummer Director Michael Bromwich and other high-ranking administration officials who have to do with this very permitting and lease process. And we again went to sit down with these officials in the Obama administration to again make this very point. The formal moratorium was lifted a year ago, but the problem persists, and we need to do better. We need to issue permits in a much more healthy pace. We need to get that important domestic energy activity back up and running in the Gulf of Mexico. Recently, Madam President, there was an independent study by HIS Global Insights, and that put some hard numbers on this situation. That study said, Madam President, that leasing in the Gulf of Mexico is down about 65% from pre-formal moratorium levels. It also pointed out that the waiting line of people and companies to get permits has almost doubled. It's increased 90%. And so what does that mean? That means far less activity in the Gulf, far less energy activity for the country, and far fewer jobs, jobs we need now more than ever in this horrible economy. Let me give you some other relevant numbers. At the end of September, just a few weeks ago, there were 21 floating rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, of which about 18 are currently drilling wells. That compares pre-moratorium to 33 floating rigs, 29 drilling wells at that time. That's a 37% drop in both the number of rigs and those drilling. Since the moratorium began, 11 rigs have left the Gulf of Mexico. Only one of these has returned. In addition, 3 more are sitting idle. 7 of these rigs have left to African countries like Egypt, Nigeria, Liberia, the Congo. 3 have gone to South America, mostly Brazil, also French Guinea, and the remaining rig was mobilized to Vietnam. This all translates to about 60 wells lost based on the original contract terms for these rigs. And the loss of these rigs isn't just loss of equipment. It's loss of important energy and economic activity, and it's loss of jobs. It's lost spending of $6.3 billion and direct employment, lost direct employment of 11,500 jobs over just 2 years. And when you look at indirect employment, it's a multiplier that brings that lost job figure to way more than that. Again, Madam President, it started with a formal moratorium. The formal moratorium was lifted 1 year ago today, but the problem persists because there was a de facto moratorium and there is still a permit logjam. Another example of this enormous problem isn't just permitting. Another example is lease activity by the administration. And again, that is completely separate and apart from permitting, but the dramatic decline in lease sales, lease activity that the administration is putting out shows the same problem mindset. What do I mean? Well, in the last fiscal year, the administration had no new lease activity. Zero, nothing, nada. What that means is just a few years ago, the income to the federal government from lease sales was almost $10 billion, and that has fallen like a rock, gone through the floor, and is now zero. That's another indicator of a problem mindset in this administration leading to a dramatic economic slowdown. We need to reverse this. We need to do better for the economy, for jobs, and for that important revenue it brings to the federal government, which could lower deficit and debt. And so, Madam President, as we talk about the need to create good American jobs, as we also talk about the need to grapple with our deficit and debt situation and dramatically lower deficit and debt, as we talk about the need for revenue to be part of that picture, domestic energy has to be part of the solution. And it can be a big and productive part of the solution to both of those huge problems, the need to create good American jobs and the need to lower deficit and debt. If we aggressively pursue domestic energy production, starting in the Gulf, fully reopening the Gulf, get the permit process to a pace at least equal to pre-formal moratorium levels, get lease activity back online, and then expand to other areas of our resources, off the Atlantic, Pacific, offshore Alaska. We have enormous resources that are now off limits to energy production. If we do that, we can grow jobs, we can grow federal revenue and lessen deficit and debt, we can help attack both of those major economic problems for the country. Again, yesterday I met, along with Congressman Landry, with Director Bromwich, to make those points, to give specific examples of what we can be doing to get down that path in favor of good American jobs, lowering deficit and debt. I hope it made a difference. Ultimately, only time will tell. But, Madam President, this needs to be part of our overall economic approach. This needs to be part of our deficit and debt reduction approach, and it can make a major contribution to solving both of those problems. I hope on a bipartisan way we will do that and urge that in the Senate, and the administration will break through the negative mindset they've had for several years and do that in an aggressive way. Our country needs it. Our workers need it. We need it as taxpayers to lower deficit and debt, and this would be a very productive way forward. Thank you, Madam President. With that, I yield the floor. Then I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Michigan.
Madam President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, more than 14 million Americans are without work. The American Jobs Act would help up to 2 million Americans get work or keep their jobs. It would prevent the layoffs of hundreds of thousands of teachers, police, firefighters, and other first responders. The jobs bill would give tax cuts to millions of small businesses, would give incentives to those businesses to hire new workers. The American Jobs Act will provide a payroll tax cut to millions of American families. It would help our returning veterans find jobs. The American Jobs Act would put thousands of construction workers on the job repairing crumbling schools, building and repairing roads and bridges. Now, the chief economist for Moody's, Mark Zandi, estimates that this legislation would add 2 percentage points to economic growth and will reduce the unemployment rate by up to 1 full percentage point. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg believe this bill, quote, would help avoid a return to recession. That's their words. That's what the majority of our economists say, both sides of the aisle, across the political spectrum. How does it do this? The bill uses ideas that both Democrats and Republicans have supported in the past. It would not add a dime to the federal budget deficit, and its provisions are overwhelmingly popular with the American people, according to all of the public opinion polls. Madam President, we should be debating this bill. We should be offering amendments, as the majority leader has said we will be doing. We should be improving it. We should be preparing to vote on it so that millions of American working families can get the relief that they need. We should do this so we can demonstrate to our constituents and to the world that we will come together to act in the face of crisis. And yet here we are, roadblocked again. Now, why are we roadblocked? Because our Republican colleagues last night voted not to allow us to even begin to debate legislation that has ideas that so many of them have supported in the past. Senate Republicans are once again walking down the filibuster road. The vote last night was not a vote on the American Jobs Act, because filibuster rules of the Senate require 60 votes. Senate Republicans last night were able to prevent the Senate from proceeding to a bill addressing the jobs crisis. Now, we all know that the rules of the Senate give the minority the power to stop us from holding this debate. But exercising that power, as they did last night, is profoundly mistaken. What they are doing when they do that is they are using a filibuster to prevent the Senate from even debating this bill. And what that does, in turn, is elevates partisan interests over the good of the country. Now, a number of us are going to be speaking today because we are deeply concerned that Republicans, once again, have signaled to an anxious and a skeptical nation that we cannot address a great challenge of the day. We're deeply concerned that the single most important need in the country, jobs, will not be debated and remedies will not be sought because the Republicans once again are walking down the filibuster road. If Republicans oppose this bill, which is their right, vote against it. Better yet, Madam President, if Republicans oppose this approach, for heaven's sake, offer an alternative jobs bill. Offer a substitute. An alternative, something where the American public can compare what is in our jobs bill with what the Republicans presumably favor. They oppose ours without saying what they favor, except vague references to less regulation. Everybody's in favor of eliminating wasteful regulations, but nobody believes that you can do serious deficit reduction or create serious numbers of jobs by just freezing regulations. And by the way, the small business community doesn't believe that. The surveys which were taken of small business people by their own organizations say that the biggest problem small business has is not regulation and it's not taxes. It's a lack of demand. And this bill helps to create demand by putting dollars into the pockets of our workers. There's a tax cut here which is very important to continue to help stimulate that demand. And so what's coming across the American public, loud and clear these days, is that the Democrats here in the Senate have an alternative. The Republicans are filibustering that alternative without offering one of their own. Now, Madam President, the majority could seek to break this filibuster by forcing the Republicans to sustain the filibuster and to try to wear them down. That process, however, at this time in this Congress is not a practical approach because it takes weeks or even months to break a filibuster. It's just simply too late in the session for us to practically be able to do that. And by the way, the American people should not have to wait that long in any event for us to act. But there's another way to overcome a filibuster. It's not just forcing the filibusters to filibuster. That's one way to do it. It takes usually months in order to succeed. But it would dramatize where the obstruction is. But the other way to overcome a filibuster is for public opinion to wear down the Republican wall of obstruction. And that is probably the only practical path available for overcoming this filibuster at this time of this Congress. So I hope that the President will use his bully pulpit to make clear to the American people that it is the obstructionism of filibustering Republicans that prevents us from taking action on a jobs bill. Now, the President has very effectively gone around the country supporting his jobs bill, and I commend him for doing that. But what we need him now to do is to take that bully pulpit, which is unique to the President and to the presidency, and to use that bully pulpit to make it clear to the American people that filibustering Republicans are obstructing us from even taking up a jobs bill. The Majority Leader has made it clear that this is open to amendment. If the Republicans have a better idea, they can offer a substitute. But what's going on here now is that without any alternative of their own, they are preventing us from addressing the major issue of this country. The Republican leader last night repeatedly asked, unanimous consent, to send this bill back to the calendar if we did not get 60 votes to proceed. The Republican leader wants this bill to go away. Well, this jobs bill is not going to go away. It should not go away. And the Republican leader is engaging in wishful thinking if he believes that because he and his colleagues on that side of the aisle are filibustering a jobs bill, that means that the filibuster is going to succeed and that this bill is simply going to be returned to the calendar. The Majority Leader has said that he's going to try again. Senator Reid said specifically he is going to bring this bill back again by using his rights after he made it clear that he is going to reconsider this bill last night. He has the right to do that because of the way in which he voted last night, voted with the majority at the end in order that he could reconsider this bill, a technical way that he already had expressed his view very strongly supporting cloture, but he also then in order to bring this bill back under the same cloture petition, then filed a motion to reconsider as a member of the majority side at the end after he switched his vote so he could do so. And I commend the majority leader. I commend him for taking that action. I commend him for signaling to the American people, to the media, to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle that he is going to try again. We're not simply going to fold our tent and go away. The majority leader is going to move to reconsider at a time that he believes is appropriate, and then there'll be another effort to break a Republican filibuster so that we can at least debate this critically important legislation. Madam President, I want to refer to and introduce for the record and ask unanimous consent that the matter I'm now going to read from be made part of the record. This is an analysis on the jobs plan by Mark Zandi, and he is an economist at Moody's, and this is what he said about the President's job proposal. It would help stabilize confidence and keep the United States from sliding back into recession. It would add 2 percentage points to GDP growth next year, add 1.9 million jobs, and cut the unemployment rate by a percentage point. The plan would cost about $450 billion, about $250 billion in tax cuts, and $200 billion in spending increases. Many of the President's proposals, he said, may be unlikely to pass Congress, but most importantly, they have a chance of winning bipartisan support. They deserve bipartisan support. Again, most of these proposals have been made by Republicans, not just by Democrats. But even if we cannot get the Republicans to support the proposal, because at least on the spending side, it is the President's proposal, on the revenue side, it is now a Democratic Senate proposal in terms of the millionaire's surcharge. But if the Republicans will not vote for it, if they will not offer a substitute, an alternative of their own, if they will not seek to amend it to improve it, for heaven's sake, allow us to take this bill up. I'm happy to yield the Senator from Ohio.
Thanks, Senator Levin. I tried to explain this. I was on some radio calls this morning with stations in Dayton and Cincinnati and all over the state. And the questions they asked were just that. Wait a minute. Okay, I understand people being against a proposal, but why would the leader of one political party say about a jobs bill when unemployment is this high in your state and my state, millions and millions of Americans want jobs, they can't find them. Why would they say, let's not even put it on the floor for discussion? I mean, the rules of this place are peculiar, obviously, but why would you say, I'm not even willing to bring it up for a vote, I'm not even willing to debate it, I'm not even willing to set the stage so we can discuss? I mean, people don't want to hear about process, I understand that, but people do want us to do something about jobs, and the first step is you have a debate, you bring the bill forward, you have a debate, you offer amendments, then you come up with something. And last night, as you recall, Senator Levin, we voted right before the jobs bill, we voted huge bipartisan votes, 63 votes on China currency to do what I know you've advocated for years. We have a level playing field in our dealings with China, so many Chinese companies don't get an advantage selling here, and so many Michigan and Ohio companies don't get an advantage when they sell into China, disadvantage, a tariff, currency tax tariff, if you will, when our companies in Michigan and Ohio try to sell into China. So I guess I'm curious your thoughts on why we wouldn't even set ourselves up, why the Republicans wouldn't want to at least come together and say, let's debate it, then maybe we can make some interesting amendments that we can come together on, like we came together bipartisanly just 24 hours ago, less than that, fewer than 24 hours ago, to come up with a real jobs bill.
I wish there were an explanation which were satisfactory, frankly, or an answer which is satisfactory to Senator Brown's question. I'm afraid the only answer that I can come up with is because this started off as an Obama jobs bill. It's been changed. We now have a different source of funding for it. We have a millionaire's surcharge in there, which will fund for these critically important programs, job creation programs. I can't think of any other reason than they think that it will simply go away. What's an explanation? Maybe it was in the unanimous consent request of the Republican leader last night. I ask unanimous consent that this bill not be amendable. No amendments would be in order under his unanimous consent proposal. And then when it doesn't get 60 votes, which he knew it wouldn't get, that it be immediately returned to the calendar. That's what he asked twice last night. Immediately returned to the calendar. The Republican leader wants this bill to go away. It can't go away. It shouldn't go away. It will not go away. The majority leader has already said that he is going to move to reconsider that vote last night, and I expressed the hope in my remarks that the President uses bully pulpit not just to support the jobs bill, which is critically important. He's doing a good job as he goes around the country, but to make it clear where the obstruction is, that the Republicans will not allow us to consider a jobs bill. Amend it if they want to try. Substitute their own if they have one, which so far they don't. But let us debate this bill. And I hope that the bully pulpit of the President is used not just to support a jobs bill, which is so critically important, but to point out where the obstruction is. And I'd be happy to yield to the senator from Rhode Island.